Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your Friday night to be here for this important talk. We're delighted to have Dr. Pauline Gagnon with us for this talk tonight, and also another one next Monday. She's an absolutely fascinating person and a great storyteller, so I hope you'll enjoy her. Just a couple of housekeeping announcements. Should you need it, hopefully you won't. The fire exit is through the front door, downstairs and out through the front door. On the ground floor, there are ladies and gents toilets, and there is a non-binary toilet on the fourth floor. We'd like to thank you. We have some Dias people here and some people from outside. I don't know if you've been here before. We are Ireland's only and the world's second institute for advanced studies. And here we study theoretical physics, Celtic studies, and cosmic physics, which comprises astronomy and astrophysics and geophysics. There's some fascinating work going on here. But on to tonight, we're delighted to partner with the Institute of Physics for this important event, and we thank them for their support. Brendan is going to pop up here very briefly to tell you a little bit about them and their EDI work. And then Dr. Venus Case will be up to give Pauline a very brief introduction before we start with the talk tonight. Thank you.
Thanks very much, folks. I won't take up much of your time. Thanks very much, Michelle, for introducing us, and also for providing this opportunity through Pauline as well, because it was wonderful that Michelle, as Dias, came through to the Institute of Physics when Pauline had offered this particular talk on her journey in physics and some practical advice as well. And it's right in line with the Institute of Physics. So for those of you who don't know the Institute of Physics, we're a charity and a membership organisation. I like to say the shorthand is we're a giant family for physicists, so people who are already in physics, people who are thinking about physics, and those that aren't even thinking about physics yet, and hopefully able to engage them as well. And we're also trying to inspire young people, and a very big part of that is working around messaging to those who influence young people to think about physics. And the ideas of who can or should or does physics is something we're very, very keen to support. So Pauline's talk is completely in line with our objectives and our strategy at the Institute of Physics. And just down the back, later on, you might see there's two little pieces of publication that we have. There's our careers booklet, which has profiles of physicists, many people from different backgrounds, diversity in person, but also diversity in the field of physics that they're working in, or engineering. And it gives a little flavour of their personalities and their journeys, and it's hopefully inspirational to a lot of people. And then, as well as that, we had a writer in residence, Chandrika Narayanan Mohan, last year, who had a conversation specifically with physicists underrepresented in physics, people from a variety of backgrounds, women in physics, those who identified as part of the LGBTQ+ community, and just learning about their journeys, but having open conversations, and she turned them into incredibly emotive poetry. So I hope that's complementary to Pauline's talk tonight. So if you do want to check out more about us, we're iop.org, and if you're around afterwards, happy to chat about it. But I'm going to stop talking about the Institute of Physics because we're here for Pauline, so perhaps invite Venus to come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, both Michelle and Brendan. Michelle, for organising this wonderful event. It is with my absolute honour and pleasure to introduce to you Pauline Gagnon. She is a brilliant science communicator. I have a signed copy of her popular science book, which I treasure a lot. A little bit about Pauline. She was born out there in Canada. And from, I guess, the early stages of her career, she's been interested in science communication. So she was teaching in different colleges, and then decided particle physics is the way to go. So she went to University of California, Santa Cruz, go banana slugs, She worked in CERN and was quite involved in the discovery of the last missing piece of the standard model of particle physics, the Higgs boson. And she kept a blog up to date as events running up to the discovery of Higgs were kind of developing. And I remember reading that blog. It was absolutely fantastic. Not just for non-physicists, but also for maybe shy physicists who don't want to ask questions. It was absolutely fantastic. I really learned a lot from it. And then since 2014, Pauline has retired and has focused specifically on science communication and has given over 150 talks in different countries. And we're going to hear two of those amazing talks, one today and one on Monday. So without further ado, I invite Pauline. I look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that. Thanks, Brendan and Michelle, also for the very kind introduction and for the invitation here. I'm really grateful to you both and for your idea. Now I have to deliver after this amazing introduction. So throughout my career, I was asking myself not just questions about the Higgs boson and the fundamental particles in the universe, but what was wrong with me? Because I faced many difficulties, and I started thinking, do I look like this to my colleagues? And what I'll be giving you tonight is a short, my personal story, but it will be for you to judge if that is really personal. So, as a child, I was, so you see me here on my first day at school, and my parents, you can see, were thinking that I would go for a long studies, the oversized bag they had for me. So I was terribly curious, and all the girls in my class wanted to be nurses, teachers, or flight attendants, but I said that I wanted to find out what matter was made of. And I had no idea why I came up with that idea, but it stayed with me. But science was a lonely place for women in the 70s and to the 90s. When I was in the high school, it was easy, we were all girls. The Catholic school, you know the situation here in Ireland, so the public schools were run by the nuns, and it looked like that without uniforms. And then I was really looking forward to being in college because it would be mixed, men and women. But oh, what a shock. We were 40 students and 2 women. It was really a shock. And I did like the woman you see on the picture. I would always sit in the front row next to the other woman in the class. And we knew we had no choice but to be the best in the class. Otherwise, we would not have been tolerated and we would not have survived. So we did that. Then I went to an engineering school in Montreal, l'École Polytechnique de Montréal. There were about 2,000 students and we were 8 women. The walls were plastered with posters of the previous graduation, and it was all men. The first woman graduated in 1936 from Polytechnic School, and then it lasted 37 years before the second woman graduated. So it was not very women-friendly there. This is a bit slow. Then I left there because it was too difficult, and I just decided to go for physics, but again, we were 2 women out of the 10. And after that, I became a college teacher because being French Canadian, we were still an oppressed nation in Canada. We didn't have the same opportunities for education, for healthcare. There were way more universities speaking English universities than French-speaking universities. Nobody encouraged me to go to a master's degree or something like that. So I became a college teacher. And again, I was the first one to teach in the 2 colleges where I taught. The first college, the other men would not even prepare their classes with me when everybody was always doing all the professors preparing their classes together. I was pushed aside. And then I made the best move of my career. I went to a lesbian bar in Montreal. And otherwise, I would never have become a physicist. And that's where I met my first girlfriend. And I was lucky. The woman was from California. So I just packed everything in my car and decided to drive to San Francisco, enter there illegally, but I didn't have a visa. And then some friends said, but you seem to be interested by physics, why don't you go back to study? And I was thinking, me, a master? I could not think of it. But I did it because there were lots of re-entry students there. And it was amazing. At San Francisco State University, we were 5 graduate students in the master's program, 5 women. So it was really amazing, but then it became normal again. For the PhD at Santa Cruz, I was the only woman out of 8 students. And after that, I moved to CERN. And CERN is the largest particle physics, the largest physics laboratory for particle physics. But 13,000 people, physicists work there. At the time, it was about 12% women. Today, it's 20%. When I was in California, it was really wonderful because even the physicists are more progressive there. And I was younger, I was out as a lesbian, and I felt invincible. It was really easy. Actually, I first started with a very sexist advisor, and then I dumped him, and I went to work with an open-minded, progressive woman. And it was really nice with her. And being a lesbian was not an issue, and I felt it was not an issue. I did my research at Fermilab, which is near Chicago, and our group was an all-women group. The professor, 3 students, 1 postdoc, and eventually she hired 1 man. His name was Guy Blair, and we called him the token guy. And so, it was a small experiment for particle physics scale, about 70 scientists, only 10 to 12 women, so 14%, it's not huge, but those people, the core group, who was based at the lab and was really running the show, it was mostly, there were lots of women, 6 women out of the 19 people based at the experiment, so 32%. And the woman, it was a woman who was effectively running the experiment, even though she didn't have the title. It's been proven that discrimination disappears when members of a minority group account for about 30%, and it was certainly the case there. I gave this talk last fall at Indiana University, and a student said, you should not be called minority groups. We are not minority, we are just excluded people. And so let's not talk about minority as if we're deficient or something, but more that we have been historically excluded. So at the E791, we had a ball. We were having this core group of women, we were having a lot of fun. So I'm here in the middle with a different color hair and wearing my mother's wedding dress. We had a dress rehearsal, and because English was not my first language, I didn't know what a dress rehearsal was. And so I said, okay, let's get dressed. If it's a dress rehearsal, we were just testing all the equipment before the beam would arrive for the first data taking and all that. So we had this dress rehearsal, and then one day for fun, every 3 months we had a collaboration meeting, and there was this big oval table, and then chairs all around, and the self-appointed important people would sit at the oval table, and us, all the women and the riffraffs, would sit around. And so one meeting, I said to all the women, let's arrive 5 minutes early, that's all we need. 5 minutes early, we sit at the round table, we don't say a word, we just sit there. And so all the women were sitting there, and so the guys would walk into the room, and some didn't notice anything, but many had a second take, and it was really nice just to show them we are there, they are women in this experiment. And so with another grad student, we were responsible for a calorimeter, and there was an oil leak on that calorimeter. There was it was made of segments about 1 meter long and about 5 centimeters wide. And at one end, there was a crack somewhere, and the oil was leaking on that. It was a piece of a wave shifter, we called it, so like a fiberglass, optic fiber. And so there was a whole section of the detector that was dead because of that. And we wanted to have a good thesis, so we thought, okay, we should try to repair this old detector. So we crawled under the detector, and I had to put my head on the side because my nose was too big. My friend had bigger breasts, and she had to squeeze everything to get in there. It was dirty, filthy dirty. We found a piece of shit about the size of my finger, because there were some animals running around. groundhog, I don't know. And it was disgusting. So after an hour or two under there, we started getting a bit silly. And we realized we could not fix the leak, but we were trying to think, how could we stop the leak? And then we came up with an idea, which we presented at the next meeting at this oval table. And we showed them how we had found some super absorbent polymer gel that would be doing radiation safe and whatever. So we stuck that in, and the guys in the were all blushing red when I showed that. And the women were all worried, asking me, how often do you have to change it? And so, but the answer was, we never had to change it, once did the trick. So, and that was my thesis defense. I had a t-shirt saying, I can't even think straight. So, and I got my diploma. Okay, so that was, we had a great time at Fermilab, because there was this group of women, and we could be what we were ourselves. We could be ourselves. CERN was a much more conservative environment, and I lacked a supervisor who cared and who would protect me. And the Opal experiment where I went, there were about 400 physicists, maybe 10–12% women, and all the women were married to a physicist in the same experiment. So nobody was making nasty comments about those women because their husband was there. So they were kind of protected. There was only one who didn't have a husband. I was the lone lesbian, and I was too different. I was sticking out like a sore thumb. At CERN, there is this nice tradition that the groups all go out to have lunch. We have a wonderful terrace. You've been there, Venus, at CERN. So this wonderful terrace, and sunny in the summer, and with view on the Mont Blanc. It's wonderful, you know. And every group at lunchtime, they go out and they eat together at lunch. But somehow, I was always alone to sit. My group disappeared. I was never invited to join. Or at the beginning, I was, but then they started forgetting to pick me up for the lunch. And when I would show up at the table, the conversation would die out. I soon got the point that I was not welcome. And I started either eating alone. For a while, I found a young gay man who was also alone, and we ate together, but then he left. So I started asking myself, but what's wrong with me? Why can I get a promotion? Why are my ideas so rarely acknowledged? Why is my work attributed to others? Why am I always denied a conference talk or even the possibility to attend a conference or workshops? And those, I'm sure many of you here have experienced that too. But there were things that were also a bit weirder. Why can't I get people to work with me? Why was I victim of mobbing at CERN? Why do I have to eat alone most of the time? And then you start wondering, you know, do I stink? You know, what am I doing wrong? And so CERN appears to be a very wonderful place. 13,000 physicists from 112 nationalities as of last year. And you could run into a group like this, but this one is a special group. It's a group of teachers, high school teachers, coming for training at CERN to learn how to get their students excited about particle physics. But you see, there's quite a variety of people. But at CERN, in fact, 80% of all scientists are male, and 80% of the people are white. So it's not so diversified after all. Of course, it's way better than it was 100 years ago at the Solvay conference, the most famous picture of those days, where the only woman is Maria Sklodowska-Curie, and all the other ones are the big names of modern physics, Lorentz, Einstein, Schrödinger is probably there, yeah, there, and Heisenberg, all those guys. So things have changed, but it's still not so welcoming to everyone. So why is science still so white and so male-dominated? It's because our society is biased. Our society is sexist, racist, homophobic, classist, and so then you exclude all the others. Biases come from repeated exposure to stereotypes, as has been demonstrated by these researchers. And biases are pervasive. You really need to make conscious effort to fight your own biases and to counteract the unconscious and unintentional gender biases. So people are biased, and that includes women and all the other members of groups that have been historically excluded. So a black person can be racist, a woman can be sexist, and a lesbian can be homophobic. So because we always exposed to those stereotypes around us, and we also absorb them. So if you want to avoid biases in hiring, if you want to hire more women or more people of all sorts for your school, the application should be anonymous. If you have an anonymous application, you're protected from your own biases, unconscious and unwanted biases. But you have to do it properly. You have to mask all information that you cannot determine the ethnic origin, the gender, all that. This has been done at the School of Analytical Sciences, Adlershof. It's a technical and engineering, computing and technical university in Berlin. And they used to have normal application for their students. And with a standard doctoral student selection, only 20% of the selected people were women. And like the director of the school explained in a conference that I was attending, he said, of course, we're not stupid, we were taking the best students, okay, among all the applicants. And so 20% it turned out were women. And then they went for anonymous applications, and thus 57% of the selected students were women. And even though only 35% of the applicants were women, so nearly twice as many as had applied. And not only that, but they ended up with 81 students recruited from 29 different nationalities. So they really increased their diversity just by doing this easy trick of anonymous applications. And this is to block our unconscious biases. There is a lot of sexism, for example, in the student evaluations. 127 science professors at 6 American universities, prominent universities, were asked to rate applicants for a position as a lab manager and indicate a reasonable salary for this person. So it was a fictitious thing, but the 127 professors didn't know that. So it was supposedly a graduate student applying to be in charge of the labs for the undergraduates. And they submitted the CVs. They were identical CVs, but some were signed by John and others were signed by Jennifer. And both men and women rated John 4 out of 5 and Jennifer 3.3 out of 5, despite having identical CVs. So you see those stereotypes, those biases are unconscious. Not only that, but they offered $4,000 more annual salary, starting salary for John than they were suggesting for Jennifer. The same type of evaluation was done for racism, and this time the authors wanted to see if Emily and Greg were more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal. So what they did again, identical CVs, just changing the name of the applicants. And the applications with white names, Emily and Greg, received 50% more interview offers. So most studies on discrimination focus either on gender and race, but their finding applies, I believe, to all kinds of discriminations. Often people say, oh, we'll have a selection based on merit, you know, like the number of publications and citations and stuff like that. But it's also twisted. For example, discrimination in citations. There was a study based on 200,000 publications between 1960 and 2015 from the 5 most prestigious astronomy journals, like things like Nature, Science, and I don't know what. And so all excellent papers. And then they looked at the ratio of citations that those publications, when the first author was a man, received, with respect to those for women, signed by women. And in the early days, so 50 years ago, it was 60 years ago. It was a ratio of twice as many citations for a paper signed by a man than a paper signed by a woman. Even today, there's still a 5–10% difference remaining. Discrimination on the class origin. It's very difficult for a person who is the first one in his or her family to attend university to make it. You don't have all the support, you don't have all the culture and all that. For example, in the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, a large collaboration of 700 astronomers, mostly, half of them replied to this study, and of them, only 22% of the scientists were the first ones to attend university in their family. And 31% their parents had done undergraduate studies, and 47% they had either a master or a PhD. When you compare between men and women, the difference is even worse. It's only 12% of women who are first generation university students. So many people have told me that they have experienced lots of hurdles from being based on the class origin. Okay, so when we look at numbers, we can see that there are less women, or there are less black people, or less all sorts of different people in the group. But here is a study done on what is the experience of women in physics. Once we make it there, are we treated the same? And so this is something that was published by the American Institute of Physics about 12 years ago. 15,000 physicists from 130 countries participated in that study. And so they divided the response between people coming from less developed countries and those coming from very developed countries, just to make sure that it was not changing the answers. So people were asked, for example, do you have sufficient access to professional activities? Are you sent to conferences? Are you part of committees of all sorts? Things like that. And the women in less developed countries were saying 50%, only 50% said yes, men 62%. But if you look at the binomial error on a sample of 15,000 people, the binomial error is 0.5%. It means that a difference of 12% between 50 and 62% is 24 sigma. It's a huge difference, huge difference. Very developed country, the difference is similar. Do you have enough sufficient resources? Of course, everybody complains that they don't have enough money, enough lab assistants or students, or enough lab space or money for traveling. But the differences between women and men are still huge. Was your career affected when you had children? The women say yes much more often than men. Who assumes the domestic tasks? Let you guess. And less challenges for parents. Women who become mothers are offered less responsibilities, whereas a man who becomes a father, then he's a respectable person. You can trust him. He's the family, the head of the family, and all that now. And you can. So you assume that the mother will be stuck with the sick children, but the father is not the case. So you see that the differences are huge. It's not only the numbers, but also the experience of women. And this was done for women, but it can affect all the other types of discrimination. So I've spoken about race, sexual orientation, physical and intellectual handicap, people on the autist spectrum, religion, being a Muslim, for example, we don't see many of them around us. Ethnic origin. I was a French-Canadian lesbian working in an English group at Ottawa. I had a ball. Class origin. And the latest one that I discovered is on age. I gave a talk at the Royal Institution about a year and a half ago. And their background was black, and my hair is really sticking out as gray. And so there were all sorts of comments, and then tons of nasty comments like, what is this little granny has to tell us about the future of particle physics? What does she do? She should go back and cook muffins or knit the socks and nasty, nasty comments. I was shocked. I was really hurt. It was the first time it happened to me. There were 70,000 views of their thing, this lecture I gave on the future of particle physics, and I learned something in that day. Okay, but the thing I had misunderstood throughout my career was the effect of sexual orientation or gender identity. And I did not realize it until about 5-6 years ago, when the American Physics Society, again, published a report on the climate for LGBT people in physics. And they found out that LGBT physicists are isolated. They lack professional networks, mentoring, role models. So they also saw that LGBT physicists experience or observe exclusionary behavior such as sexual or verbal harassment, homophobic comments, exclusion from study groups or social activities. That rang a bell. Expectation of incompetence. A friend of mine at CERN is non-binary, and he always liked to walk around at CERN, knitting shawls in the cafeteria, very complex shawl, and being very in your face and flamboyant and all that. But he said, when I give a talk on physics, nobody will catch me wrong on my physics. But I was thinking, my God, what kind of pressure is that on you? That you have to be always 110% sure. You know, it's and many people, I met several trans physicists, and they said that once they changed from male to female, all of a sudden, people were not paying attention to what they were saying. Even those who didn't know they were trans, just that they were a woman and then they were not taken seriously. So many participants to the study said that they experienced it, but twice as many observed it. And it's twice as worse for trans people. Those are the people who have it the worst. So we really have to watch out for our colleagues and make sure that they're treated fairly. LGBT physicists with additional marginalized identities face most discriminations. That lesbians experience it 3 times more than gay men. At CERN, we had the LGBT group, and I was often the only woman there, and I was talking with my colleagues, the gay guys, and they had some shit, but it was not so bad, but I could tell it was way worse for me. And it's worse for people of color. And transgender and gender non-conforming physicists encounter the most hostile environment. There is some very interesting case. Ben Bars was a professor of neurobiology at Stanford University. And a colleague of him who did not know that Ben was a transgender man said, Ben Bars gave a great seminar today, but his work is so much better than his sister's work, because there were lots of papers signed by a female named Bars. He just changed his first name. And so the colleague didn't know that Ben was a transgender, but he assumed that the other papers were by his sister. Fortunately, this young man died a few years ago from cancer. Imposter syndrome. This is something I learned about along the way, and it really helped me better understand what was going on around me. Imposter syndrome is used to describe successful women who can't acknowledge their achievements. And for example, if you ask women in science, are you sometimes afraid others will discover how much knowledge or ability you lack? And most women will say yes, that they fear that eventually someone will find out that they are a fraud, that they are an imposter, that they don't belong there. Is your high ability the major cause of your success? Most women will say no. They just say, oh, I worked harder than the others, or I had luck, my advisor was really nice and supported me, or whatever. So they always put their success on external causes. Do you feel highly confident that you will succeed in your future career? Most women will answer no. So you see that for many, many people, what is clicking like this? I think it's there. it affects, I'm sure, all members of historically excluded groups. We can't believe we belong to the field because we see so few of us around us. And then, of course, there must be something wrong with me. And this imposter syndrome, unfortunately, all the biases in the society fueled that problem. Prejudices result in discriminatory views, policies, and procedures for women, people of color, and other members of discriminated groups. When managers and colleagues treat people differently due to biases, it increases their self-doubt and people question their own value, resulting in a greater risk for imposter syndrome. And essentially, it leads us to feel miserable in our field. So we feel that we're not where we belong, and you're always afraid someone will expose you. So how to fight the imposter syndrome? Well, you need to help yourself. You can always when you start freaking out, you're giving a talk and you think, oh my God, let's see that I don't know what I'm talking about. Take a deep breath and try to reassess the situation. But when you have time, make a 2-column evaluation. The proofs, irrefutable proof that you're no good, and the evidence showing that you are a good scientist. And try to judge it better. And be kind to yourself. This little nasty voice in you, nagging you and all that. You will never talk as harshly to anybody, including your enemies, with this harsh voice. So be kind to yourself. Seek valuable feedback from trusted people, your advisor or a mentor. It's really important to have a mentor. And to help others around you to avoid that, you can be mentoring people and trying to support them. Make sure that the workplace is inclusive. Make sure that around you, if you're a white man especially, make sure that all your colleagues are treated on equal footing, that the women are not left out when you're going out for a beer or whatever. Give positive feedback to your colleagues and be kind to colleagues. Many years ago, I was giving a talk in Freiburg in Germany. And one young guy came to talk to me. He was young when I met him, and then he was a professor at Freiburg. He said, "Did you remember the first time we met?" Yeah, more or less. He said, "Yeah, I was coming for the first time to CERN to give a talk, and I was dead, in my shoes. I was really nervous. And you came to me. I was the head of the working group, and I said, don't worry, your analysis is strong. You're okay. You'll do fine. I'm sure. Come on." You know your stuff, go for it. And he gave his talk and he felt that he could do it. And it was something like 10, 15 years later, and he told me that, and I had forgotten. It was not much. I felt it was my job to support the young people there, but it really made a difference for him. And for me, I would never have managed to write this book that Venus so kindly praised earlier. I was in research at CERN for 16 years, and my ideas were in Europe and all that. But then 3 years, I was with the communication group, and there wasn't a week where there was not 3 or 4 colleagues who would come and praise me on a blog that I had written, or an interview that I had given to some international papers, the Irish Times. And so it really changed everything. I was really suffering from this imposter syndrome, but this thing of having positive feedback changed everything, and I felt strong enough to write this book, something I would never have been able to do prior to that. So how did I survive after all? Mostly by fighting the isolation. So there are 3 things that I did. I co-founded a women's group in my big experiment, Atlas, where we were 3,000 physicists. I joined the LGBTQ group at CERN once it was founded, but that was something like 12 years after I had arrived there. And I held on to the feminist ideas that I was defending in the 70s when I was a teacher in a college. We were in a union and we had a women's group, and we kept saying that the personal is political. And that really made a difference. Remember that the lack of diversity is a social and political problem. There is no scientific evidence of the superiority of men or white people on other groups. But those ideas still prevail for historical and political reasons. There is an interesting book called Inferior by Angela Saini. She reviews all sorts of articles that have been trying to prove the inferiority of women. All of them fail, including several articles by Darwin. So it's interesting. So how can we achieve more diversity in our research group, in our schools, in our working places? There was an article published at the end of November last year called How Well-Intentioned White Male Physicists Maintain Ignorance of Inequity and Justify Inaction. It was a brilliant paper. It's a long paper, 30 pages, but it's really worth reading. So these are, it's a study based on about 40 physicists describing themselves as progressive people. And they were asked, okay, what do you do to talk about the problem of the lack of diversity in science, and what could we do about it? And the authors found that there were three major ways that white men were finding to avoid taking action. And the first way was to say, I know this problem exists, but not in my group, not in my department, not in my university, not in my field of research. So they would always distance themselves. It's somewhere else, has nothing to do with me, and there's nothing I can do. Sorry, I'd love to. So then the problem is that all data indicate that sexism and racism in physics are pervasive and happen in every institution, every subfield, every group of Joseph. So you need to really do a survey in your group, ask the people in your group how they feel about it, and you might discover a few things. The second way progressive men avoid taking action is by blaming the whole thing on grand societal structures that cause inequity, and there's nothing they can do about it. So they would say, for example, they will blame the school system, that we have a school system at two tiers, or whatever, how to say it in English, that the private schools and the elite schools and whatever. But the problem is that it doesn't explain everything. There is a leaky pipe in physics. We lose way more women along the way than we lose men. So there is a specific problem that leads to excluding women from the field. So it's not just that they don't come. It's that once they come, they realize, oh my God, and they go elsewhere. There is also, people would say people of color are poor and they make bad decisions. They go back to having taking a job early because they want to make money and all that. But not all people of color are poor to start with, and physics is lucrative, so they will be making good money if they stick to it. So it's not an excuse either. Racism and sexism are rooted in history. That's true, but that does not explain that. This is a general argument that should affect all fields, but why is it so much worse in physics, engineering, and technology than it is elsewhere? So there are specific problems in science that exclude people. And the last and third way progressive men avoid taking action by justifying their inaction. They would say, for example, but I don't really know those issues, no LGBTQ plus people, sexism, I don't have race, I don't know those things, but they don't go and look for information. If I go and I tell a student in my class, your comment was quite sexist and you better shape up, well, it's uncomfortable to talk to others or even challenging, most likely, higher up in the hierarchy. It's uncomfortable. Fear of making the aggressor feel bad, so they don't want to tell a student that they have to change because the student would feel bad, but they don't care about the woman who was insulted by this young person. Those targeted don't want more attention. Like there was a case that was given in the article a black woman, was sitting on the third row, and she realized that there was nobody else sitting on the third row. You know how students always sit about in the same place? So she was sitting on the third row, and then she realized that the third row was always empty, and the fifth row, well, there were tons of people. So then she switched. She went to sit on the fifth row, and in no time, the fifth row was empty, and everybody was sitting elsewhere. So she realized that people did not want to sit next to her. She mentioned it to the professor, but he said, oh, I don't want to do anything in a case like that because I don't want to bring more attention on this woman. When the woman was asking for help, and still they didn't take action. And they usually say, well, the person who is in charge of diversity and inclusion should take care of those things, not me. So white men have the most power to intervene because you have the least to lose. It's really wonderful that there are so many men here tonight because I think it's really important and you can really do a lot. You can intervene, and if there is a racist comment, I'm much more in a position to talk, to say something, because I'm a white person than a person of color. Their own comfort is more important than providing equal opportunity, and the lack of knowledge does not lead them to seek some. So the recommendation of the study was to make people of privilege the target of change. That instead of us trying to organize, or the black people and all that, make people of privilege responsible for changing the situation. Teach them how they are complicit in oppression. Hold them accountable for their ignorance. You can now get a lot of information, and it's really nice that you came tonight to hear something about that. Make equity work, the work of white men, and make public data measuring the extent of inequality in local environments, make public that data. So do surveys in your own environment and make sure that it's okay. We should teach white men skills to confront oppression and change it. One thing, I'll end with two studies which I think give us hints on what can be done to change the situation. One study called the Price study talked about the best strategy to encourage female students. What is the best strategy? Is it to have an all-girl physics class, a female physics teacher, female guest speakers, discussing the work of female scientists in physics classes, or discussing the underrepresentation of women in physics class? Which one of those strategies, I'm sure you've probably experienced or seen some of those, which one do you think is the most effective to bring more women to physics?
Yes, discussing the work of female scientists in physics.
Excellent idea. Any other ideas?
All of them.
Lot of them? Yeah, you will.
All of them.
All of them, okay. But the best, which one is the best? Most effective? Don't want to waste our time here. You want to
Teacher?
a physics teacher? Oh, very good. The funny thing is that nobody gets the right one, which is discussing the underrepresentation of women in physics classes. And it looks really stupid for an approach, but what the message that is given then is that the young girls will understand that there is nothing wrong with them by being willing to go into science. It's not that you're genetically deficient, that you're a woman and you want to do science. No, that's what I was thinking for a while. There is nothing wrong with you. It helps young women realize that the problem comes from society, not from them. Female students who had these discussions, according to the study, could better identify themselves with becoming physicists, and those discussions don't deter young men from entering science, make them more aware of problems. And the other study that I found particularly helpful is how to having discussions in physics conferences, astronomy conferences, large conferences, and you have to have those discussions wedged between the top two talks in that conference in a general session. You cannot put it in a parallel session where only the women and the other members of marginalized groups will come. You have to wedge it between the two most important information that will come in that conference to make sure that people will stay. So, another very interesting paper, how to make women of color thrive. So those women were black, and they were also, many were from underprivileged social backgrounds. And so, they were in a school where it was white guys, all from educated family, rich families. So there were a lot of differences. And they found that the best way to fix that was to turn the workplace into a safe place. Get the whole group to fight microaggressions and make sure that faculty members dissuade discriminatory behavior. When I started with others, the women's group at CERN, or when I went to a LGBT group at CERN, is that then you are in a safe environment. All our working groups and study groups should be also safe environment. A place where nobody would be submitted to nasty comments or looks or whatever, attitudes. And so those who are from the privileged groups should be aware of that and stop such behaviors. Break the isolation through social events where the whole group can get to know each other. And the group, for example, in that case, met for beer and pizza for discussion. Everyone could feel that they belonged to the group, and it helped fight the stereotypes. One thing also was important is to stress the fact that we are not born physicists. We become physicists. You learn to be a physicist or a scientist. So intelligence can develop. It's not something that is innate. So we should fight the stereotype of the lone genius in science. And I don't know if you're thinking of the same person as me, but the man who alone, single-handedly revolutionized physics at the turn of the century, Albert Einstein, when he never talked about how he had done everything with his wife. And that's what I will be talking about on Monday night. And I'm also working at the moment on a mini-series on Wilhelm Heinrich Einstein and other forgotten female scientists. And unfortunately, it's not progressing fast because my collaborator, an astronomer, suffered from a long COVID, and she's been in bed for about 2 years. So, but she seems to recover, and she had a bad case. So I highly recommend this book, but I think it's almost difficult to find it anymore. So I'm looking for an editor for this book now. Tell more on that on Monday. But diversity. So I've been promoting the idea that we need more diversity, and the reason is very simple: is that diversity improves science. Creativity comes with being different, and creativity is one essential element in science. Diverse groups publish a higher number of papers and receive more citations per paper than average study that has been done recently. So my take-home messages is that if you love science, don't hesitate, go for it. Despite everything, I would still choose to become a physicist. I would just fight a bit more systematically and organized, not that I know as much as today. If you belong to the privileged group, be part of the solution, not part of the problem. It's time for white men to do their part. If you belong to a historically excluded group, don't stay isolated. Look for allies, and let's change our work and study places into safe places. So there is nothing wrong with any of us. We all belong to science if we want. So I would leave it there. Thanks a lot.